I'm Sean Holyfield, CEO and founder of HR Law Made Easy. We get asked all the time, how did we create a platform that grabs all of the HR laws, keeps them up to date real time, creates all of the content you need to be HR compliant, as well as provides the tools and resources needed to prove that you're compliant with the law, including sharing that content with your employees and then storing what your employees have done with that content. So a mouthful to go over all of that in one string of a sentence. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do what we do so that it's a little bit easier to understand, because this is a pretty complicated area. So in the United States, there's the federal government and there's state governments and there's local governments. And we're all familiar with the fact that there's the federal government. We vote people into the office, so forth and so on, state governments and local governments. And in the US, laws are created by those governments. So the federal government creates its own set of laws, the state governments create their own set of laws, and local governments also create their own set of laws. So you have three buckets of law. It's a lot of law. And laws are just simply rules that we're required to follow. And there's four major types of law. As an attorney, I could get into a lot more detail, but I'm just going to give you the super quick and easy version of the laws so that you don't have to go to law school. So in the US, there are over 1.5 million HR laws. Let's just start right there. Huge number of laws. The majority of those laws are actually federal. Most companies, most people don't realize that, but the vast majority of these laws are actually federal laws. They were created by the federal government and they were sent out to all the people that live in the states, and the federal government said, hey, you need to follow these laws. The federal government also gives states the ability to create their own laws, so long as those laws don't change the federal law in a way that makes it less strict. That's kind of complicated. Let me explain. If the federal government says that you are not allowed to discriminate based on age, a state government can't change that law. But what they can do is they can add another layer of rule to that law. They could say, yeah, we agree with the federal government, which they have to, can't discriminate based on age, but we're also going to add another category in our state. You also can't discriminate based on the color of the t-shirt that somebody's wearing. That's a made-up rule. That's not actually a law. But what it does is it illustrates that federal government has its own set of laws that everybody has to follow, and then the state governments can create laws that make the rules that exist at a federal level slightly more strict. Kind of worth going over at a high level. Don't want to get into too much detail on that. These laws that get created get published in four buckets. I'm really high leveling this, but four buckets. Codes, which are created by the legislature. Now that's the House of Representatives, the Senate. It's the government body that we vote into office. And those are called codes. And there are a limited number of codes by state and at a federal level, but the codes are the highest level of law that applies to HR law. Next are regulations. Now, regulations get created by the agencies. So, for example, if you were to go get a driver's license, you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. You don't show up to your congressperson's office in order to get your driver's license. So the people that we vote into office create agencies, and those agencies are allowed to go out and administer or manage or do the things that need to be done daily to make sure that people are following the laws that are created by the legislature, by the people that we vote into office. Those agencies create something called regulations, and they write those down. And what they are is, in many cases, a restatement of the code. It gets into a little bit more detail, provides a little bit of additional information that sometimes can make it easier to understand. And those regulations also get published, and they're out there, and those are laws as well. Agencies also create additional content, stuff like rulings, guidance, website guidance, things that they publish and put out into the public for people to use and understand. And that agency guidance is another bucket of law, meaning that whatever the agency is telling you that you need to do, that's now a rule that you need to follow as well. Last, and probably the biggest volume of law, are court cases. And there are many, many court cases in the US tied to employment law. There are cases all the time, somewhere in the neighborhood of tens of thousands of new cases every year at a federal and or state level. And there's a lot more than that, but the ones that actually get published and get put in books and that you need to read and follow, those court cases are actually very important, because what they do is they let the public know how courts are applying these laws that have been issued by the legislature, by the agencies, and what's likely to happen to you as a company if you end up in court. So all of this information gets published by the government, whether it's the people that we vote into office or whether it's the people that they tell, hey, we want you to go run this thing, like the Department of Labor or the Department of Motor Vehicles. So with all of these laws out there, step one is someone needs to read all of these laws. They need to read every code, every reg, all agency guidance, and the court cases in order to understand what companies need to do or what companies are required to do. Now, I like to call this things and stuff because the required things and stuff is a list of the things that you are required to do as a business, depending on the facts and or circumstances of your business. So let's say, for example, that you're a company that's operating in Texas, Florida, and California, right? You're going to have a list of required things that you need to do at a federal level. In other words, what the federal government is telling you that you need to do based on laws. You're also going to have 3 additional buckets of things that you need to do. You've got a Florida list based on the Florida government laws. You've got a Texas list based on the Texas government laws. And you have a California list based on the California laws. In addition to that, depending on where you're located in those states, there may be local laws that apply. Laws, for example, in West Hollywood, laws in certain counties in Florida. These local laws that may or may not apply to you, depending on where you're located, also will come in. And there's additional laws that we need to kind of put on the table and look at. Now, once we understand where a company is operating, once we understand all the details of your company, your industry, how many employees you have, where they're located, and additional information in our platform, we're able to grab all of the laws that apply to your organization, and we're able to create a list of required things and stuff. It's not called that in the platform. That's just what I like to call it. But it's the required things that we need to do as a business in order to follow the HR laws. And you could also call this content. So all of this stuff is content. It's information that we've got to either assemble, create, or provide to our employees. And it's content. It's things and stuff. And let me give you examples. It's stuff like policies, which are rules that we have to share with our employees. The federal government requires that we share certain policies or rules with employees and that they acknowledge that they read and understood that information. Additionally, we've got procedures. These are specific things that we need to do in a specific order based on the law. Could be what we do specifically when somebody asks for leave or time off. It could be what we do in the event of an emergency. It could be health and safety procedures. In any event, there's procedures. There's also agreements, whether those are employment agreements, non-disclosure agreements. Many of these agreements are not necessarily required. Some of them are, but having those agreements when you need them is really important. There are also documents like specifically things like how you respond to somebody that's requesting leave, what you need to document or put in place in order to memorialize an agreement with you and an employee, say somebody's taking time off, or other types of documents. It could also be forms that employees need to fill out in order to make sure that you're compliant with the HR laws. Notices and posters, a lot of us are familiar with these because we've seen these in break rooms or in our offices. It's this large poster, often that's laminated, that has really fine print, and it's got a bunch of information on it. We've captured those posters and notices digitally, and we share those digitally so people can actually see them and understand them. And then lastly, training, which is specific training that's required depending on the state that you're operating in. And those trainings will often cover things like preventing discrimination, preventing harassment, preventing sexual harassment, preventing retaliation, and other additional trainings that may be required at a state and local level. So this content, this required stuff, is really, really large in terms of volume. In many states, a single company is, when you look at all of the required content, that list can be over 100 unique things that your company needs to have in place for a single state based on the federal, state, and local laws. Sometimes that list goes up to over 200 things per state. When you start combining multiple states, now what you're dealing with is a giant volume of content. You're dealing with huge amounts of policies, large amounts of procedures, agreements, documents, notices and posters, and training. In fact, in the US, there are over 3,300 notices and posters that exist in the US. Now, you don't need all of them, but you do need them available behind the scenes, depending on where you're operating, in order to make sure that you get the right ones to your people. So most companies that have focused on HR law, or most attorneys or other groups that have looked at HR law compliance, what they've done is they've gone out and they've created content. And in many cases, they never had access to all the laws. They may have gone out and read something that was published by an agency. They may have gone out and read a law that was created by the legislature, by the people we vote into office. They may have gone out and read some sort of court case and said, hey, it might be a great idea to create this document or this procedure in order to avoid getting sued based on this court case, right? And they've done these kind of things kind of on a one-off basis. But prior to HR Law Made Easy, nobody in the US had said, hey, enough's enough. Let's go grab all of this content. Let's make sure that we have a software system that can grab all the content and keep it up to date on a 24-hour basis, which is really important, because if we're not current on this content, it's going to be impossible to make sure that we're compliant with the rules. So we had to create a software which we developed in order to go grab all this law and then maintain it on a 24-hour basis, so that every day we know that the content, the laws that we're starting with in order to create this content are up to date. With those laws now up to date and fully visible and fully in view of our legal research team, we can then actually create the required content that you as a business need in order to be compliant with the law. And it's really this two-step process that gets us started. It's going to get all the laws, read them, make sure that you understand them, and then create all of this content. So inside of our platform, we've got every policy that you would need to be compliant: procedures, agreements, documents, notices and posters, training, and more. And all of that content is there on the shelf for you to view and access and use. But when you come into the platform, you fill out something called a workplace profile. What's magical about this is that profile asks a series of very simple questions that we created after we read all these laws. Because after reading these laws and knowing what content is required by state, by locality, also at a federal level, we were able to create a list of simple questions that you can answer that goes into the platform, grabs the content that you need, and puts it on the table for you, so that you're not having to search around or figure out what to do. It's as simple as filling out a workplace profile. We go grab all the content that's required, we bring it to the table and say, hey, these are the things that your organization needs for your employees in Florida. These are the things that your organization needs for your employees in Texas. And these are the things that your organization needs for your employees in California. Once you've got all of that content, now what's really important is that you share it with employees. And that's done through the employee portal. So inside HR Law Made Easy, we have an employee portal. And what that employee portal does is it has all of your content that you can go in and view. It allows you to upload the information about your employees, get their information in there, and it lets you share that content with your employees so that your employees can take the steps that are required for you to be compliant with the HR laws. HR laws don't stop with having the content on the shelf. It's not enough to say, hey, I've got the right policies sitting on a shelf. What needs to then happen is we need to share these policies with our employees. We need to share these procedures with our employees. We need to share this content with our people so that our employees can either view, sign, or acknowledge that content. Every one of these pieces of content requires one or more of these actions done by an employee. So when we send this stuff out, employees can view, sign, and or acknowledge, and the platform knows what your employees need to do with that content, and it presents it to your employees easily for them to do that. They log into the employee portal, you've shared this content with them through the portal, they view, sign, and or acknowledge, and then this is the final step, and it's probably the most critically important step to the entire diagram here, or solving this puzzle of HR compliance. And that's that we've got to be able to prove that our employees actually did these things with our content. And that was the creation of compliance files, employee compliance files. So within the platform, you can go in and you can search by employee name the exact types of content that they've either viewed, signed, or acknowledged, the day, time that they viewed, signed, and or acknowledged, and whether they viewed, signed, or acknowledged that content. That allows you to do a couple things. One, with those employee compliance files, you're never left wondering, are we or are we not compliant with all of these laws? Because you have all the content, you've shared it, and you know what your employees have done with it. but also years from now or months from now when somebody comes and asks, hey, did so-and-so employee sign this thing? You can simply go into their employee compliance file, look and see what they've actually signed and or acknowledged and or viewed. And you can actually just click a button, create an employee compliance report for that specific employee, as well as you've got copies of the individual things that they viewed, signed, or acknowledged attached to that compliance report. It's complete compliance all in one place. And in fact, I think it may be the only platform that actually allows an organization to be fully compliant. Many companies talk about employee handbooks, which are simply a delivery mechanism for these policies, which is just one of the things and stuff that need to be done in order to be compliant. But those delivery mechanisms are handbooks, which are very important in getting those policies to your employees. It falls short of all of the other things that need to be done, as well as the fact that many courts and many court cases are now finding that if employees don't individually acknowledge policies, and I mean at a policy by policy level, it's not compliant, meaning that there's no expectation, there's no way you can prove that an employee actually read this policy if you stick it in a giant handbook that has a signature page at the end. HR Law Made Easy has fixed that. We've created something called an employee handbook presentation. So there are videos right side by side with the policies themselves that employees acknowledge as they go. They have to watch the short video, the full policy is there, and they have to acknowledge each individual policy as they go, which means in the employee compliance files, we're able to show the day and time that that employee viewed that policy and acknowledged that individual policy, which satisfies the court cases that today are saying, hey, traditional handbooks aren't cutting it. You can't prove that employees actually read and understood these policies. It's just one of the many tools that we've added to the platform to make compliance possible by studying the law and understanding what's happening out in the world, by grabbing all of the law and making sure that we have the right content in place for you to be able to be compliant, by providing the tools that allow you to share that content with your employees, and by being able to store that compliance in one location so you're never left wondering, are we following the law? Are we actually compliant? HR Law Made Easy, because it was about time that somebody actually made HR Law easy.